A regular black woman kicked out a boutique. 1 hour later, her billionaire white husband arrives. Before we dive into today's story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. The smell of expensive perfume lingered in the air like an unspoken warning. Amani Reed stepped into the boutique with the kind of quiet confidence that comes from knowing your worth. She didn't wear designer clothes or flashy jewelry. Her hair was pulled back into a neat bun, her jeans were well fitted, and her soft beige coat had seen a few winters, but it was clean, crisp, and wrapped tight around her like armor. It wasn't the kind of outfit that screamed money, and Amani knew it. Still, she had every right to be there. She had walked past the boutique in downtown Charleston a dozen times, always wondering what it would be like to actually enter. The window displays were cold and pristine, like tiny glass stages where dresses hung like ghosts. She'd finally worked up the courage that Saturday afternoon. It wasn't about the clothes. It was about her, giving herself permission to belong in a place that had always whispered, "Not for you." But as soon as she crossed the threshold, the temperature shifted. The boutique was quiet, too quiet. 2 sales associates stood near the register, one tall with bleached blonde hair and a sleek ponytail, the other wearing a silk scarf that matched her lipstick. They paused mid-conversation when Amani walked in, their eyes flicking over her like a barcode scanner. "Hi," Amani said politely, offering a small smile. They didn't smile back. The taller one, her name tag read Melody, tilted her head and asked, "Can we help you with something?" It wasn't a warm question. It was a warning disguised as courtesy. Amani's smile faltered. "Just browsing, thank you." She walked slowly past the racks, careful not to touch anything. She could feel their eyes trailing her, not in curiosity, but suspicion. It was the kind of gaze black people learn to sense from an early age, a quiet, heavy surveillance that made your spine stiffen. She picked up a silk blouse just to admire the stitching. "And we'd prefer if you didn't touch the merchandise unless you're purchasing," Melody said sharply, her voice loud enough to echo. Amani blinked. "I'm sorry." The other woman chimed in, "We just had some issues with, items going missing. Store policy." Amani let the blouse fall gently back on the hanger. She could have left right then, but she didn't. Something in her hardened. "So you're saying I look like a thief?" Neither of them answered, but their silence shouted louder than any slur. "When we have the right to refuse service," Melody said coolly. "And we're asking you to leave." Amani's jaw tensed. She should have said something, anything, but a storm of emotions clouded her chest. Rage, humiliation, disbelief. And worse, a deep, familiar ache that came from knowing this wasn't the first time she'd been treated like she didn't belong. Without another word, Amani turned and walked out. She didn't look back. Outside, she sat in her car for a long time, hands trembling around the steering wheel. Her phone buzzed beside her. It was a text from Will. "How's the shopping going, love? Need me to pick you up?" She stared at the screen for a long time before responding. "I'm fine. Just needed some air." She didn't tell him what happened. Not yet. Will Benson was everything those women inside that boutique would never expect. White, billionaire, CEO of one of the fastest growing tech firms in the country. But more importantly, he was kind, real, the type of man who still stopped to open her car door, who kissed her forehead before bed, who remembered her mother's birthday without being reminded. They'd met 6 years ago at a charity event in D.C., where Amani had been managing social outreach for a small nonprofit. He was scheduled to give a keynote speech but got lost in the hallway looking for the bathroom. Amani had given him directions and ended up listening to his speech from backstage, her arms crossed, brows skeptical. She didn't trust men in suits. He changed that. Still, she'd spent the last 6 years watching people look at her with that same expression the boutique workers wore today, confused, guarded, silently asking, what is she doing with him? And now, here she was, a grown woman, educated, married, successful in her own right, and still being made to feel like a threat because of the color of her skin. She closed her eyes, inhaling deeply. Then the phone rang. "Hey, babe," Will's voice came through, soft and bright. "Hey," she said, trying to keep her tone even. "You sure you're okay?" There was a long pause. "No," she said, "not really." And that's when she told him. Everything. Every word. Every glance. The silence on the other end of the line was electric. Then Will spoke. "Baz, stay where you are. I'll be there in an hour." She frowned. "And Dolly, you don't have to." but the line had already gone dead. She looked down at her phone, and for the first time since walking out of that boutique, Amani smiled. An hour can stretch like eternity when you're waiting for someone to show up and shake the ground that just swallowed you whole. Amani sat in the parking lot across from the boutique, watching the sky turn a deeper shade of steel. Storm clouds were rolling in. Fitting, she thought. Her fingers traced the rim of her paper coffee cup, long since gone cold, as her thoughts spiraled. She wasn't angry anymore, not just angry. It was more layered than that, shame mixed with exhaustion, and beneath all of it, a quiet question she hated asking herself. Why does this still happen? She had built a life that was supposed to be safe, respected. She'd done everything right, good schools, hard work, no shortcuts. She was no stranger to microaggressions, the subtle digs, the looks when she and Will walked into a room. But this was bold, public, and cruel. And what hurt most was how normal it still felt. Her phone lit up again. 10 minutes out. Will. She closed her eyes. She hadn't asked him to come, but a part of her was relieved he had. Inside the boutique, Melody and the other saleswoman, Sasha, had returned to idle chatter. They didn't mention Amani again. Why would they? To them, she was just another moment of problem handled, quickly dismissed and forgotten. But outside, the storm arrived, not from the clouds but in the form of a sleek black Mercedes G-Class SUV that pulled into the curb like it belonged in a movie. Will stepped out. He wasn't wearing anything dramatic. No expensive overcoat, no entourage. Just a navy blazer, a soft gray tee, and well-worn jeans that somehow still looked expensive. But it wasn't what he wore that caught attention. It was the way he carried himself, like someone used to owning the room, whether or not he announced it. He looked around until he spotted her. Amani got out of her car slowly, watching him cross the lot with long, purposeful strides. His jaw was tight. She could tell from the way his hands were clenched into fists that he was barely holding himself together. "You all right?" he asked softly, pulling her into a hug. Her shoulders sank into him. "Yeah, now." He kissed her temple. "Stay here." "And Will, don't make a scene." "And I'm not making a scene," he said. "And I'm making a point." And before she could stop him, he turned and walked straight into the boutique. Melody looked up from the counter just in time to see Will step inside. She offered a generic, practiced smile, the kind they reserved for rich clients they hadn't sized up yet. "Welcome to Bella Lux," she chirped, her tone now sugar-sweet. "Looking for something special today?" Will's eyes scanned the room once before landing on her like a steel weight. "Yeah," he said calmly. "I'm looking for the manager." Sasha blinked. "She's not here today. Is there a problem?" Will walked forward slowly. "Yes, actually, a big one. About an hour ago, my wife came in here. You kicked her out." Melody's face dropped, the fake smile evaporating like mist. I'm sorry, sir. I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding." "Oh no," Will said, voice cool and sharp. "I think you understood exactly what you were doing." Melody looked toward Sasha for backup, but Sasha was frozen, eyes wide. "I don't know if you assumed she couldn't afford to be here, or if you just don't like the idea of a black woman standing in your store looking confident, but you embarrassed her, humiliated her, for no reason other than your own ignorance." He leaned in slightly, voice low. "And that's not just bad customer service, that's discrimination." Melody's voice quivered. "Sir, Will pulled out his phone, showing them the screen. "And that's my wife. Her name is Amani Reed Benson, and I'd like to inform you that this little boutique just made a very costly mistake." Sasha's lips parted. "Wait, Benson as in?" "Yes," Will interrupted. "Benson, CEO of Ardent Tech, one of the largest shareholders in Holston Retail Group. You know, the one that owns this building?" A hush fell so thick it choked the air. Will straightened. "Now, I'm not interested in yelling or suing you, not yet, but I will say this. My wife walked in here hoping to treat herself. You treated her like a criminal. So you've got two options. You apologize to her, properly, or I make sure this boutique doesn't last another 6 months." Melody's face went pale. Outside, Amani watched through the tinted glass, heart pounding. She hadn't expected this. She knew Will had power, sure, but seeing it in action was something else entirely. And then the doors opened. Will stepped aside as Melody and Sasha hesitantly walked out, their expressions pale and shaken. Melody swallowed hard, approaching Amani with an almost robotic stiffness. "Miss Reed," she began, fumbling. I want to sincerely apologize for how we treated you earlier. It was completely out of line. We misjudged you, and I'm sorry." Amani looked at her, not with anger, not with smugness, just calm, measured disappointment. "But you didn't misjudge me," Amani said. "And saw me, and you decided I didn't belong. Don't apologize because you found out who my husband is. Apologize because it was wrong." Melody looked like she wanted to disappear, and Amani let her sit with that discomfort. Will placed a gentle hand on Amani's back. "Ready to go?" he asked. She nodded once. "Yeah." And with that, they walked back to the car, together. But something in Amani had changed. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Later that evening, Amani sat by the floor-to-ceiling windows of their Charleston townhouse, watching rain bead down the glass. The city glowed beneath the storm, headlights shimmering in puddles like broken stars. She held a glass of red wine in her hand, untouched. Will was upstairs, on a work call, but her mind wasn't on him, or the boutique. It was on everything that came before. The years of being watched while shopping, the teachers who were surprised by her intelligence, the interview panels that smiled tightly and said, "Oh, you're very articulate," the neighbors who assumed she was Will's assistant, the subtle sting of a world that insisted she could only belong if someone else vouched for her. And today had pulled all of that to the surface. When Will came downstairs, his voice was softer. "Hey, you okay?" Amani didn't turn. "What if I hadn't told you? What if I just came home, stayed quiet, and let it sit inside me like all the other times?" He sat beside her. "And I would have known something was wrong," he said gently. She finally looked at him. "And you don't understand, Will. You never will, and I don't expect you to. But I need you to see that what happened today wasn't just about a rude store clerk. It was about what it means to walk through this world in my skin." Will nodded slowly. "And I do see that, or at least, I'm trying to. I hate that it took something like this for me to feel how heavy it really is." She let out a breath. "I don't want your money to be the only reason people respect me," she whispered. "I don't want to feel like I only matter because I married a billionaire." "You don't," he said firmly. "Imani, you matter because of who you are. The world's the one that needs to catch up." A long pause passed between them, full of unspoken truths. Then he added, "What do you want to do about this?" Amani stared out the window. "Sen, I want to be seen, not just by them, by everyone. I want to use this moment, not to lash out, but to speak up. Because if it happened to me, it's happening to someone else right now. Someone without a husband who can shut it all down with a phone call." Will reached for her hand. "Then we speak. Together." 2 days later, Amani posted a video on her personal social media page. She didn't name the boutique. She didn't show anger. She just told the story. Clear, measured, unflinching. "And my name is Amani Reed Benson. I'm a nonprofit strategist, a daughter, a wife, a woman who works hard and lives quietly. And last Saturday, I walked into a boutique in downtown Charleston and was told to leave. Not because I was loud, not because I did anything wrong, but because I was black and didn't look like I belonged." She paused. "Then my husband came an hour later. He's white and rich, and suddenly they couldn't apologize fast enough. But I want to talk to the women who won't have that kind of backup, the ones who are treated like this every day and don't have a billionaire walking behind them." The video was raw, honest, vulnerable in the way only truth can be, and it exploded. Within 24 hours, it had 400,000 views. By the next morning, over 1 million. People started sharing their own stories. Women, men, people of color, mothers, grandmothers, college students. The comments became a flood of recognition, of pain that had been bottled up, now spilling into the light. Even major news outlets picked it up. A Charleston woman shares experience of racial profiling, inspires nationwide conversation. Will watched it all happen from the sidelines, proud, protective, but careful not to center himself in the narrative. He knew this wasn't about him. This was Amani's voice, and she was using it. A week later, the boutique put out a public statement. It was long, wordy, carefully written by lawyers. It mentioned regret, unconscious bias training, and a donation to a local diversity organization. But it never once mentioned Amani by name, never said we were wrong. That told her everything she needed to know. Then, one afternoon, Amani received a letter. It was handwritten, sloppy, nervous, from Sasha. It read, "Amani, I don't know if this means anything, but I wanted to say I'm sorry for real. Not because of the attention, not because of your husband, but because I watched it happen and I said nothing. I've worked in that store for 3 years and I've seen this kind of thing before, and I stayed quiet because I thought it wasn't my place. But your video, it made me realize silence is part of the problem. I quit this morning. I couldn't keep pretending I didn't see it. Thank you for speaking. Sasha. Amani read it twice, then once more, and finally, her shoulders dropped, just a little. Later that night, as she and Will sat on the couch, she turned to him and said, want to start something. He looked over. Start what? A platform, a real one, a space where people can share stories like this. Be heard, not just react to racism, but heal. Build something stronger, something lasting. Will smiled. Whatever you need, I'm in. She nodded, eyes bright for the first time in days. This wasn't just about one store. It was about a world that needed rebuilding, one story at a time. 6 months later, the boutique downtown had a new name. The owners had sold it quietly, after weeks of declining sales and a PR nightmare that no amount of community outreach could clean up. Amani never stepped foot in that building again, but every time she passed it on her morning walks, she felt a small shift inside her. Not revenge, not satisfaction, just a soft exhale, a release, because something bigger had taken its place. What began as a single social media video had grown into something no one could have predicted. A voice at the door. That's what she called it. Amani launched the initiative from her laptop, in the quiet of her sunlit home office, never imagining how quickly it would snowball. It started as a digital forum, just a space for people to share their stories without shame or fear. But within months, it turned into a growing network of community partners, workshops, public talks, and mentorship programs aimed at young Black women navigating professional spaces where they often felt invisible. She wasn't chasing headlines or cameras. She just kept showing up, with honesty, humility, and a steady fire in her voice. And people listened, not because she wasn't a wife of Will Benson, but because she was Amani. One morning, as she scrolled through emails over breakfast, she paused at a message flagged by her assistant. Subject: speaking engagement. Harvard Business School alumni panel. Her eyes widened slightly. The email continued. Dear Mrs. Reed Benson, we've been following your work with a voice at the door, and we believe your insights on equity, leadership, and resilience would be invaluable to our students. Would you consider joining us for our keynote speaker series this fall? Warmly, Professor Dana Wong. She stared at it for a long moment before smiling, soft, quiet. The girl who once had to prove herself twice as much to be seen half as clearly was now being asked to lead the room. Later that day, Amani and Will sat at a corner cafe near the waterfront, their Saturday ritual. Will leaned back, watching her with a proud, amused smile. So, let me get this straight, he teased. You're turning down speaking offers now? And not turning them down, she said with a smirk, sipping her tea, and being strategic. He grinned. Remind me never to underestimate you again. You never really did, she said quietly. That's why I married you. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the boats drift past the pier. Then Will asked, Do you ever think about that day? She nodded. Not with anger, just clarity. It woke something up in me, or maybe it reminded me who I've always been. He reached across the table and gently took her hand. I know the world doesn't always treat you right, but I want you to know I see you, always. Her eyes welled up, but she didn't look away. Oh no, she whispered. That afternoon, Amani received a message through the voice at the door website. It was from a teenage girl in Milwaukee. Hi, Miss Amani. I saw your video a few months ago. Something like that happened to me too. I didn't tell anyone because I thought maybe it was my fault, like maybe I was being too sensitive. But hearing your story made me feel less alone. I want to be a lawyer one day, but sometimes I feel like people like me don't get that far. Anyway, thanks for speaking up. I believe I can do it now too. Jasmine. Amani read it slowly. Tears slipped down her cheeks, not of sorrow, but of something deeper. A recognition. A connection that spanned generations, distances and differences. And in that moment she realized something. What had happened to her wasn't the end of a painful story. It was the beginning of someone else's power. It's a crisp fall day. Amani walks into a packed university auditorium. The audience quiets. Students lean forward. Phones are down. Eyes are locked on her. She steps to the podium, her voice steady and warm. And I was once told I didn't belong, that I wasn't what people expected when they pictured confidence or elegance or success. And for a long time, I let that silence me. She pauses, looking across the sea of faces. But now I know. Every time someone tries to write you out of the story, you don't fight back with noise, you rewrite the ending. Amani smiles, and let them watch you do it.